A few years back, I talked about the curious history behind Charles B. Pierce's 1976 pre-era slasher flick The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It was loosely inspired by the 1946 Texarkana Moonlight Murders, where an elusive killer known as the Phantom terrorized a small, peaceful town to the point of hysteria, leading to a widespread manhunt in the hopes of calming the locals' increasingly dangerous paranoia. At the time, it was considered a relatively transgressive film, not only for its blunt and brutal depictions of random acts of violence, but for how it tapped into contemporary societal fears stemming from the media's fear-mongering portrayal of American serial killers such as the Zodiac. It wasn't necessarily a groundbreaking film, but it was certainly subversive for its time, as it rejected classical storytelling tropes in favor of unstructured realism where the hero does not triumph, nor does the villain get their comeuppance. However, before The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Charles B. Pierce earned his notoriety with his directorial debut, The Legend of Boggy Creek, a docudrama horror based on the alleged real-world sightings of the Falk monster in a small town in Arkansas. Yeah, that's right, I said Arkansas correctly this time. I read the comments on that Sundown video. You think my pronunciation is bad, America? How about you learn to make your mind up about how the word is fucking said?
So I am confusion. Why is this one Kansas, but this one is not Arkansas? America, explain! Explain, what do you mean in Arkansas?
So for context, last year I was making a video on the scariest Bigfoot movies, and about halfway through I realised how ungodly boring it was, and just how surprisingly unappealing Bigfoot seemed to be as a horror topic. There were some serviceable films, but besides a few twists and turns, none of them excited me enough to give them the full coverage, except for The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is frankly only getting a video because of its unique framing device. So, brace yourself. Now that I think about it, never mind how I say Arkansas, I'm definitely going to get lambasted for how I pronounce Falk, am I? Fuck it, easy come, easy go, I guess. The Legend of Boggy Creek tells the story of Falk, Arkansas, a rural community of over 300 people who, since the 1940s, are said to have been terrorized by a hairy humanoid monster living in the vast surrounding swamp that to this day is believed to still be out there. The film is a supposed reconstruction of allegedly true sightings by real people, many if not all of which play themselves, as a fictional narrator speculates and ponders over the circumstances of the Sasquatch-like creature that he recalls all the way back to his childhood. Obviously, it should not have to be said that you have to take everything with a blatant grain of salt, because it's impossible to know for sure how much of the retelling is directly from personal experiences and how much is pure dramatic fabrication to sell it to a susceptible audience. In fact, local resident Smokey Crabtree, I swear to God I'm not making that name up, actually wrote a book denouncing and refuting the filmmaker's manipulation of events, including his own story, thus leaving the film with a morally murky stain on its reputation. Nonetheless, the basic conceit of the film is a series of brief vignettes that leave the intent of the creature open to speculation, as the presentation evokes the feel of an ominous nature documentary that sustains its intrigue through impeccable sound and cinematography. The film opens with a piercing and seemingly overwhelming ambience, as you're made to feel like a lonely trespasser timidly exploring the restless wilderness, with the intense use of depth of field, zoom shots, and close-ups, creating the impression that you're searching for something hidden deep within the swamp that's sternly staring back at you. Like The Town That Dreaded Sundown, it fearlessly embraces verisimilitude over pure entertainment, even if it comes at its own expense in the second half, when the repetition really begins to bog down the pace. The film is practically an atmospheric mood piece that puts you into the mindset of the locals at the time and the endless unease of living under the fear of what is essentially an outsider to them. It's a slice-of-life docudrama on the surface and a horror movie buried beneath it. In fact, while it's not found footage, for 1972 you can see how its subversive presentation style would later influence the format, with filmmaker Daniel Myrick even acknowledging its immense inspiration for the seminal Blair Witch Project at the eventual turn of the millennium. Where it noticeably falters is during dialogue scenes involving non-actors who can't emote or keep a straight face, resulting in uncomfortable stiltness that ironically pulls you out of the realism because of how fatally authentic it's trying to be. Although on the flip side, one detail I especially love is how it juxtaposes the innate beauty and natural habitat of the creek with the sinister undercurrent of the elusive Falk monster that's persistently framed in the background as a vaguely abstract shadow that echoes the now infamous Patterson-Gimlin video. It's an understated but very smart creative choice because the haziness of people's memories calls the creature's existence into question, with one account even stating that they thought about shooting it, but chose not to out of fear it was perhaps an actual person. While the various retellings talk of the monster's uncanny strength, its vicious slaughtering of animals, and distinct growls that don't resemble any natural animal, the real strength of its mystery is how the swamp itself becomes the central character. It's accentuated as this persistent towering presence over the town, and its vast untamable terrain that hunters have struggled to navigate, emphasizing the unknown, even calling upon our superstitious relationship with folklore and cryptids that see locals exaggerate the forest and swamp as an extraordinary place that's almost beyond our understanding. The thing is, the various stories we're told do little to inform us of the actual monster, because most people are so caught up in the irrational fear projected by the wilderness that the Falk monster basically becomes manifested as a hairy, shadowy boogeyman that's form is indistinct. In fact, some stories even start to contradict each other, as some describe the monster as a dangerous menace tearing apart animals and antagonizing the locals, while others, including the narrator, remain curious that the creature is simply behaving like any other inquisitive wild animal would. It leaves the Falk monster's character open to debate, but ultimately our inability to define or understand it is the heart of the mystery. There are some vignettes that are remarkably unnerving, such as a mother trying to put her child to bed while the beast stalks from afar, only for them to find their dead cat the next day and claim it was scared to death, while other tales highlight the creature's cautious and seemingly docile nature, almost as if it's far more terrified of us than we are of it. I mean, after all, almost every encounter involves someone trying to fucking shoot it, so it makes sense for the creature to be in perpetual defense mode. While the movie isn't a commentary on gun culture or man being the biggest monster, you certainly can't ignore the recurring context of hunters constantly intruding upon the peaceful and, dare I say, sacred wilderness, just trying to live at peace. There is maybe something to the dramatic irony of us being the ones to trespass upon nature's home, and what's happening is a bit of a tit-for-tat type situation, which is fitting when we consider the framing of the story is a nature documentary that's arguably in favor of the beast. Anyway, where tensions truly begin to escalate is when one day a 13-year-old boy excitably begins to follow what he thinks are deer tracks, only to encounter the beast and without hesitation blasts the hairy bastard and runs for his life, successfully injuring it in the process. This prompts a mass hunting party to scour the forest in a bid to eradicate the elusive monster, squash the hysteria, and bring peace back to the town. However, they find themselves unable to scratch their itchy trigger fingers, and eventually come to the conclusion that the creature simply ventured deeper into the swamp and is now hiding from humanity out of fear. This leads to what I felt was an oddly melancholic transition, where seasons go by and the creature is never heard from again, causing its legend to slowly fade away as people move on and start claiming nature for themselves once again. I wouldn't say it implies so much as indirectly states that some of the locals actually begin to miss the creature, because it was really the only interesting thing about the town of Falk, like what Mothman was to Point Pleasant. But after the creature does return, it sparks a media frenzy that quickly re-amplifies the hysteria while seemingly provoking the creature instead of just letting nature be. It culminates in an extended narrative detailing two young families moving into a house together that honestly could make up an entire movie in its own right. It follows the same framework as the other stories, where one night while the husbands are at work, the Falk monster stalks the women and children of the house, but the difference this time is that it then attempts to breach the house before being scared off. It makes sense for this to be the climactic story because it's the only true instance where the creature is said to attack the locals. Again, up to this point, the monster is often a singular isolated case where it appears curious, cautious, observant, scared, and even seemingly lonely, whereas in this story it actually returns, prompting the husbands to get the sheriff, who then just leaves them with a gun and fucks off. This is why the reconstruction format works as a sort of practical solution to its problems, because the acting of the locals is so distractingly poor and unengaging that it results in a lackluster climax. It's a problem that director Charles B. Pierce did improve on in The Town That Dreaded Sundown, but even then he retained his signature docudrama style to compensate, which in fairness is probably for the best as it gives both films their own unique selling point. When the Falk monster finally returns and attacks one of the men with their literal pants down, the men defend their property by shooting into the darkness until one of them is ambushed and violently frisked by the monster before he decides to dive through the front door of his own house, landing him in hospital. Again, it's anticlimactic and doesn't sell the brutality of the creature in the way that the story desires. If anything, it looks like the man does more harm to himself than the creature, which is honestly believable. Nevertheless, the film ends on a softly poignant note that reflects back on the creature's previous disappearance. The narrator returns to his childhood home, now abandoned and dilapidated, and looks back on how the creature left a profound presence over the community, and ponders if it still lives alone deep within the creek. It doesn't fearmonger or push a legacy of terror. Instead, the creature is simply characterized by its animalistic curiosity, a desire to observe our habitat as much as the narrator wants to observe its own, ending with faint hope that the Falk monster might one day return.